All right, I think we are going to kick off the final session for today. Now, I'm going to introduce Tim, but Tim isn't going to get up until a video is played, and I'm going to leave really quickly after the video comes on because I'm on it. And I have deliberately not watched the video because I don't want to see it, and to see myself that big, I really don't want to watch. So I'm going to introduce Tim now, and then the video is going to play, and then Tim's going to jump up. So I'd like to introduce Tim Stock, Director, Hydrogen and Clean Energy at the New South Wales Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, who are our government sponsor for the conference. Now the video is going to play, and then Tim, it's on you.
Sustainable aviation fuel, SAF. Global demand for sustainable aviation fuel is accelerating, with major markets like the United States and the European Union setting ambitious 2050 sustainable aviation fuel targets, referred to as SAF.
So sustainable aviation fuel is essential for any flights that are over 150 minutes or carrying over 250 passengers. In Australia, that means that for us, we are going to need sustainable aviation fuel for the majority of our main legs across the country.
In Australia, leading industry players have also set ambitious SAF targets. Regional New South Wales is ready to meet this demand, with the potential for 5,200 megalitres of annual production from biogenic feedstocks by 2050. New South Wales holds 22% of Australia's potential biogenic feedstock. The largest volume of feedstock is concentrated in strategic regional areas, mainly in the form of crop residues and food processing waste. It is estimated that total New South Wales potential biogenic feedstock equates to 21 million tonnes per annum.
The global aviation sector has estimated 65% of aviation fuel will need to be delivered as sustainable aviation fuel by 2050 in order for the global aviation sector to achieve net zero by 2050.
These regional feedstocks, coupled with municipal solid waste and commercial and industrial waste from metropolitan areas, can serve the demand arising from regional airports, Sydney Airport, and the forthcoming Western Sydney Airport. Today, Sydney has the greatest airport traffic of any airport in Australia and is expected to double in the next 20 years. Adding to this, Western Sydney Airport is expected to handle 10 million passengers annually. New South Wales strategic ports are key trade gateways. Their proximity to major airports and capabilities to transport and store energy will play a vital role in the future SAF value chain. A skilled workforce of over 50,000 people across strategic locations stands ready to support operational needs as the industry expands.
The New South Wales government modelling has recently shown that 4.8 billion could be delivered to New South Wales through the development of a sustainable aviation fuel industry in this state.
Furthermore, New South Wales has the largest pipeline of science, technology, engineering and mathematics graduates in Australia, creating a strong workforce for the future. New South Wales is also home to world-leading universities and industry-led innovation networks, such as the New South Wales Decarbonisation and Innovation Hub, providing critical access to research and development. Under the Net Zero Manufacturing Initiative, New South Wales has invested $100 million into the Low Carbon Product Manufacturing Fund to co-fund projects which will expand and increase the state's local manufacturing capacity of low carbon products and materials, including SAF.
It is estimated that New South Wales holds the potential of 22% of Australia's total biogenic feedstock that could be used for sustainable aviation fuel production.
With diverse and rich feedstocks, robust infrastructure and a highly qualified workforce, regional New South Wales is the ideal location to establish a strong SAF supply chain. Invest in regional New South Wales and open a world of opportunity.
Well, thanks for having me here, everyone. And as you can see from the video and that promotional piece, we're really, I'm really pleased to be here to host a session on the government's role in driving us towards a low carbon or low fuel development and acceleration of this industry. So It's interesting because with this video, I was supposed to provide a presentation, but basically that's what we're trying to do. That's what we want to see. And so that said, I think that the session we have here today is going to be quite fascinating, is where it is the time. There's a lot of talk about policy and the role of governments and what we can do. So now's your opportunity to be able to think about the questions that you want to ask the speakers today. So it's pretty clear, though, from our perspective, it's pretty clear that without a global mandated and appropriate carbon pricing that's transparent and easily understood, the zero and low emissions fuel production technologies are unable to compete against their fossil-based equivalents. And as the market is unable to address this challenge, there is a need for government intervention and action, as we've heard constantly throughout today. And us as the New South Wales Government, we're taking this very seriously. So we've publicly committed to developing a renewable fuel strategy that we aim to release later this year, and we're busy combining and have been consulting with industry and doing public consultations on all the different options available to us. So but what I can't do is discuss any specific options. We're still in the policy development cycle, but I thought it'd be worthwhile sharing the 4 kind of lenses or objectives that we're trying to achieve when we consider the suite of actions that we can undertake when developing this strategy. So the first is the role in emissions reduction. So how can we use renewable fuels and the development of that to help us achieve our emissions targets? So the New South Wales Government last year committed through legislation to achieving its emissions reduction targets. So we have 50% of 2005 levels by 2030, we have 70% by 2035 and net zero by 2050. And these are now legislated targets for us to achieve across our state. And in last year, we did some projections by the department on how we're progressing towards those targets. And it shows that without accelerated action, New South Wales could fall short of our 2035 target by up to 5%. So to achieve any of our decarbonisation targets, we're going to need to use every available decarbonisation pathway, which is including the role of the green molecule and what that can do to help us in our decarbonisation journey. And we will prioritise actions that can assist the state in reaching both our near-term goals but also our net zero target by 2050. The second is a focus on decarbonising our hard-to-abate sectors. So fossil fuels, as you can see up here, provide around 90% of primary energy use in New South Wales, and of this, the hard-to-abate sectors account for about 36%. But the important nature of this is, as we go through the electrification journey, the hard-to-abate sectors will go from somewhere around 36%, about 21 of our emissions total in New South Wales to more like 40 to 50% of our emissions by 2050. So renewable and low emissions fuels will be needed, and particularly in these sectors where high temperature heat, chemical feedstocks or energy density is required, which is what we've been talking about all day today, such as in the manufacturing, primary industry and transport and aviation and maritime, but also importantly, heavy freight. So it's also worth noting the role of hydrogen in this. We've had a hydrogen strategy out since 2021, and we see it as a really critical piece of this entire puzzle of the net zero journey that we're on. So whether that's in its role in Power-to-X or in its own right as a fuel, it's really still needed to help industry in the hard-to-abate sectors. And basically the role that we see it playing is in that scale-up capability in the medium to long term, because biogenics alone will not get us to net zero. So from the release of the strategy, we're still in 2021, we're still continuing the work under the hydrogen strategy and laying the foundations for that longer term emissions abatement. And in that, it includes the nation's only legislated hydrogen target. But importantly, we've recently consulted on how we leverage that framework and how we utilise what we call the Renewable Fuel Scheme, in which that target sits, how we can potentially expand that framework into other renewable fuels such as biomethane, renewable diesel and SAF. This is because we recognise there is a real near-term opportunity to drive production of lower-cost biogenic pathways and biogenic fuels in the near term. So we see that not only will it be complementary for the work we do in biogenic pathways and renewable fuels, it will be complementary to the existing hydrogen strategy, but it's actually critical for us to be able to unlock that market to reach our decarbonisation goals. And the third element is our regional development. So like mentioning in the video, we think around $5 billion worth of investment in New South Wales can flow through this. We also, we have some level of comparative advantage in the fact we have a significant diversity in feedstocks that are available within New South Wales that we can match to optimal production pathways. Those that are currently more well known and through the technology development pathways, and those that are still needing to mature. So we see the critical importance of a circular economy, including helping farmers and the agricultural sector get value from what would otherwise be considered either a business cost or a waste stream. So we're doing further work to really understand the feedstock capability in New South Wales, and we're doing detailed analysis to see how accessible and commercially available these are. There's lots of research around the theoretical available levels of feedstock, but we really want to get down into the residues of that analysis to understand the value to New South Wales. And lastly, is improved fuel security. I know we had a session on it today, but it's a key lens in which we look through the development of our strategy. We want to be able to support activities and projects that reduce our exposure to international supply chain shocks and price volatility. And as I've mentioned, there's been many, we import almost all of our diesel into New South Wales. And we're already taking action. You'll hear from Michael from the New South Wales government on the renewable diesel trials that we're doing shortly, but there's a lot more to do. So in summary, we recognise the critical importance of renewable fuels, both biogenic and the power-to-X, and their ability to help us reach our net zero goals. And we're working feverishly towards completing our and presenting to government a strategy that we look to launch later this year. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you in this room as we develop and roll out that strategy. So without further ado, we'll introduce all the speakers. And there is a lot of them. So we have Dr. Valerie Sarisky-Reed, who is the Director of Bioenergy Technologies Office in the US, to discuss SAF potential. Martin Gulbis, who's the Manager for Business Development and Transactions at ARENA, on the investing of future Australian low-carbon liquid fuels. Michael Cashen, who's the Research Officer in Beyond Fossil Diesel at New South Wales Department of Primary Industries. Mark Tierney, who's the Executive Director of Emerging Industries from the Queensland Department of State Development. Dr. Daniel Roberts, the Research Director for CSIRO, to address the scale challenges of an Australian SAF industry. And then Anannya Mishra, who is the Project Officer also from CSIRO on Australia's feedstock opportunity. And lastly, Jonty Richardson, Senior Manager of Analytics and Consulting with Argus Media on the renewable diesel and the SAF market outlook, overcoming key barriers to growth. I think we have our first speaker joining us online. Thank you.
Hi, checking to see if you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name's Valerie Reed, and I am the Director for the Bioenergy Technologies Office at the U.S. Department of Energy in the United States. And I'm very happy to be able to be here to talk a little bit about the last 4 years and the progress we made on sustainable aviation fuel as part of our strategy for biofuels. I'm going to spend some time talking about the things that we've learned and maybe some of our next steps, though I will admit we're still in transition between administrations and working on our overall strategies. I firmly believe sustainable aviation fuel will still remain a very important aspect of our strategies. Whoops. For some reason, my slide deck isn't moving. There we go. So I will cover what we've learned about the U.S. potential for feedstocks in order to develop the industry, where we are with SAF right now and our key accomplishments, and as I mentioned, some of our nearer term new activities that we're going to pursue. For the last 4 years, the U.S. has taken a really targeted approach to accelerate the development of sustainable aviation fuel and its market under the header of the SAF Grand Challenge. This is really the result of an MOU between the Departments of Energy, Agriculture, and FAA. The SAF Grand Challenge had set aggressive goals, all meant to prove that the U.S. could indeed produce significant volumes of low-carbon aviation fuels, and from there, a market could develop. Today, I'm going to describe that progress and what we've learned about really the full supply chain that is needed to achieve these goals, because it's really critical to consider everything from cradle to grave. The key role of the federal agencies within the SAF Grand Challenge was to develop and is to develop innovative technologies that produce sustainable aviation fuel from a wide variety of domestically produced feedstocks. These are key enablers for the United States to meet its goals, both for U.S. economic development and to position itself as a global leader in the emerging sustainable aviation fuel markets. The United States also has the potential to export sustainable aviation fuel, both as technology as well as volumes of fuel, in order to support other countries in their efforts, which focus on decarbonization of aviation globally. Also, there's a widespread production of SAF that will support the long-term viability of the U.S. airlines and aerospace industries. It's a critical component of the strategy of the United Nations International Civil Aviation Organization, of which the United States is a signature. So the question really is, do we have enough feedstocks to do all those things I said we were focused on trying to do? Well, the Department of Energy has led a study over the last 20 years, with the latest version being produced in 2023. And that study is entitled the Billion-Ton Report. We do this in partnership with our friends at the Department of Agriculture. And what we have determined is that we have well over 1 billion dry tons per year of biomass and waste resources that can be grown or collected sustainably across the United States. This is more than enough to meet the portion of the demand of our transportation sector that cannot be electrified. So it's important to note that because it is a limited resource, we cannot use biomass to produce all the fuels that are necessary, for example, gasoline, diesel, jet, and residual oils. But if you take electrification into consideration, we have more than enough biomass to provide for all these other modes, as you see on the right here: off-road, rail, aviation, and marine. In fact, we believe that billion-ton can be converted into between 60 and 70 billion gallons of advanced biofuels. And that's after you consider the existing markets where that biomass is already playing a role, such as agriculture, food, trade, and other current uses of that biomass. The projected volume for the aviation sector in 2050 is between 35 and 40 billion gallons within the U.S. So we will even have fuel left over for the marine sector, which is our next grand challenge area. Additionally, as ground transport electrifies, we're going to see biofuels such as ethanol, which currently have strong markets, finding themselves in need of new markets. And ethanol is an excellent feedstock for alcohol to jet technologies. So it's an easy transition as we move into an electrified gasoline sector. Beyond these biomass sources and waste resources, we also consider the use of waste gaseous carbon through carbon dioxide emissions from industry. These also have the potential to be a SAF feedstock through e-fuels, which I know you've heard some about today. So with this ample supply of feedstocks, we recognize that it can be found in every region, every state, and in all rural and urban communities across the United States. This is a map of the billion-ton, and as you can see, there are different feedstocks within different regions of the country. but biomass can be provided in every region of a country, which allows for everyone to benefit from the economic growth and the new jobs that they'll see as we advance the industry. But with all this different feedstocks and different regions, it is also a challenge because we're going to need a diverse number of technologies if we're going to cost effectively utilize all these feedstocks to produce the right mix of biofuels to meet market demand. This is a major role that the Department of Energy plays in developing these conversion pathways that will enable the use of all of these feedstocks. And SAF and its production also has a role to play when states are considering low carbon fuel standards, which also drives the different markets within different parts of the United States. These low carbon fuel standards and SAF incentive programs have been strong within the states of California, Illinois, Washington State, just to name a few. But there are 7 to 8 additional low carbon fuel standard programs in development across the United States to help in the growth of the industry. So what are these feedstocks that I'm talking about? Well, they can be bucketed into 3 buckets. Currently used feedstocks are used for fuels, power, and products development today. This includes the use of woody biomass for biomass power, corn and soybean for ethanol, biodiesel, and renewable diesel. This makes up about 1/3 of the billion tons. And so, as I mentioned, it's already in use. The next category is the near-term and market mature available feedstocks. These are feedstocks that are currently available to us. They're here today, but we aren't necessarily collecting them or utilizing them for economic gain. We are learning how to collect them, harvesting, handle, storage, and convert these feedstocks, and working to bring the technology costs down so they'll be a viable source in the future. These are things like agricultural residues, corn stover, and other residues that the farmer would pick up along with their primary crop. Timber residues, which, as you know, can be a fuel for forest fires. So it has a role to play in forest fire prevention, and wastes. Various aspects of wastes from landfills, which present environmental problems at the urban and community level, and biofuels can play a role in reducing those wastes and providing economic gain from them. This makes up, again, about 1/3 of the billion-ton biomass that I'm talking about. And lastly, we have our emerging resources. These are things like micro and macro algae, which are currently expensive and hard to utilize, but have a great deal of potential. But it also includes energy crops and captured CO2. I'll talk a bit more about the importance of energy crops because they grow on marginal lands, land that is currently not being used to produce anything viable and can help increase profits to the farmer. This makes up the last billion tons and is the area with which we're currently studying and developing these feedstocks through large-scale field trials so we can understand them and provide that information to growers and people who will be producing these feedstocks in the future. So this is a real breakdown of what's going on in the billion ton. As I mentioned, those feedstocks that are currently available make up 1/3, about 340 million tons of biomass. And it's important to note that there isn't a one-size-fits-all for the biomass or the cost of the biomass. So the billion ton looks at a cost curve and provides volumes of feedstocks at the regional level at varying costs. We also have a publicly available tool on our website that would enable you to look at geographic coordinates, determine what feedstocks are available and at what cost you might be able to get those feedstocks so you could look towards siting a facility and know what's available to you. But as we move through this slide, we can see that there are different low, mid, and high market scenarios and different factors we take into consideration. So we're moving along that feedstock continuum, and we're bringing new feedstocks in at a variety of different prices. And that encourages us to look at feedstocks in a different way. We're going to be needing to look at how can we blend these feedstocks so we can get the optimum carbohydrate and critical material mix that we need for efficient conversion technologies. This is a priority area of study that's ongoing right now, enabling us to look at that range of feedstocks across the country, come up with the optimum feedstock products mix that will lead to financing of facilities. As you can see, we bring in at the end those emerging feedstocks, which have a long way to go when it comes to cost reduction. And my final description here is, as I've mentioned, the first 2/3 of the billion ton, which are available to us today, can make up the goal of the SAF Grand Challenge, which was 35 billion gallons. So if we are able to mobilize these feedstocks, build the facilities, we can meet the goals of the SAF Grand Challenge, and that's before we get to our emerging feedstock category. The billion ton study began to look at CO2 emissions, but didn't necessarily give it as much attention as we've given the other feedstocks. So this is going to be a section that we update in the near future with additional studies. But I wanted to point out that utilization of reused carbon through CO2 emissions can be a very substantial amount of additional carbon brought into the system for alternative aviation fuel or biofuels. 2.7 billion tons is what we estimate the U.S. industries today produce that could be captured and collected. And if you're only looking at biogenic sources so that you can qualify for renewable credits, we have about 47.2 million tons produced through our ethanol industry that could be made available through carbon capture and utilization technologies. And by the way, I'll mention that e-fuels isn't the only use of CO2. Many of you have probably become familiar with LanzaTech and LanzaJet technology, which uses microbial conversion of CO2, which is far more cost-effective today because it isn't requiring the large amounts of renewable power and hydrogen to produce the final fuel. So it's our way of moving into a CO2 utilization scenario early. My slides are stuck again. I apologize. There we go. As I mentioned, I was going to weigh in a little bit more on the energy crops as one of our emerging biomass categories. These are likely to be planted in agricultural areas where farmers are already farming, but will utilize marginal lands. This is land that they currently don't farm because it isn't cost effective for the production of high energy crops like corn or soybean. But if we look at several scenarios of energy crop production and how it impacts grain production, we can see what might happen to both food prices and farm revenue out into the future. The business as usual case is a case where no energy crops are grown. But then as we add low, medium, and high energy crop scenarios, what I mean is we're going to produce 300, 400, or over 600 million tons of these energy crops per year on the marginal lands in our agricultural communities. We do begin to see minor impacts when it comes to the grain production. We see a reduction of about 3% of grain production because of the production of these energy crops, which equates to 0.7% increase, less than 1% increase in food pricing, while at the same time, it's increasing farm revenues by 25%. This drop in production, for comparison, is about half the annual variability in corn, soy, and wheat production that we see on a regular basis over the past decade. So essentially, this falls in a little bit into the noise for variation of grain production. And that's our pessimistic scenario. In our high scenario, our market high scenario, which is our most optimistic yield scenario, there's virtually no change in grain production, no change in food pricing, but we do still see an increase in 30% for the farm market revenues. So this is a huge improvement and a real incentive for us to move into an energy crop scenario. So now I'm going to talk about the development of the pathways that the U.S. is looking at. These are things I'm sure you're very well aware of. Sustainable aviation fuel, of course, we can produce it today through the use of fats, oils, and greases in the HEFA process. But in order to utilize all of that feedstock I just talked about, we need a variety of technologies, whether it's alcohol to jet, gasification, Fischer-Tropsch, or even the production of biocrude for co-processing. E-fuels, of course, is another pathway that's under investigation. There is mandates in the EU for the production of e-fuels, but in the US, we see it as a bit too expensive right now, and so it is an emerging technology in which we're working on bringing the costs down as renewable power and hydrogen production grow in the US, making it more viable. We also look at hydrogen and electricity as sources of aviation fuel, but these are typically at the regional level for short trips with low volume aircraft. So they're not a high priority within our overall energy supply chain for aviation. This slide is a description of how the Department of Energy evaluates and develops technology across the continuum. This is what we're using to drive ourselves from innovation in the laboratory through to commercialization. And it's exactly the pathway we have followed with sustainable aviation fuel. At the early technology readiness levels, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we're really just getting proof of concept. This is a relatively low cost research and development effort to look at what might be possible. We haven't yet proven that it's scalable or economically viable at this point, so it's generally funded by government national labs. But as we get closer to the higher TRLs or the pre-pilot level, we begin to bring industry in. We want to make sure these are technologies that industry is interested in and willing to fund. So we begin to increase the cost share and move up the TRL cycle. You can see that we get to a point where at the demonstration scale, industry has a major role to play at 50-50 cost share. Currently, we're funding 9 different demonstration projects, which is showing the interest that industry has had in the technology development for sustainable aviation fuel. I'm going to move through this a little bit more quickly because I'm probably close to out of time, but here is an example of the array of feedstocks, the scales with which we're looking at these, and the number of projects that the Department of Energy is co-funding with industry. We also have facilities in our national labs, which enable that early pre-pilot phase without the need for capital investment by industry. They can come in, partner with our national labs, test their technology at the first level of scale up before they invest in pilot or demonstration scale facilities. This is an example of one of our successes, and we're moving towards demonstration with this project. This is our Evapco project, which is looking at an alcohol to jet process. We started in 2010 with some early piloting work. And as you can see, it took quite a few years and quite a few iterations of project development to get to a point where they were ready and have the financing. And we're now putting $100 million government investment in an over $200 million demonstration facility in Georgia. Key accomplishments of the SAF Grand Challenge over the last 4 years. Really, I'm impressed by these. The numbers are pretty small, but we're very excited. As you can see, when we first came up with the concept and realized that sustainable aviation fuel was a market driver, we were producing about 5 million gallons a year. We're now utilizing over 150 million gallons a year in the industry with about 45% of that produced in the US, and 65% of it imported into the US. The market demand has far exceeded our ability to keep up with the development of these projects, but we're working hard to catch up with that. And our incentive programs within the US have really taken off. We now have federal tax incentives for the production of sustainable aviation fuel. And now the last area, which I'll go over very quickly, is how can we ensure that we're able to utilize all of those feedstocks? And one of the key barrier areas is the cost of the refineries. They're very expensive, and we need to have them all over the country. Unless we can come up with an energy-intense intermediate process, and by looking at biocrude, which is pyrolyzing feedstocks, and it can utilize almost every type of feedstocks, we can produce a biocrude that is energy dense and can be transported to our existing petroleum infrastructure. That will enable us to reduce the amount of capital that's needed and produce these fuels at larger scale. Already, 22 plants in the US have tested the capabilities of biocrude for the production of renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel, among other things. So we're beginning to learn what the real barriers are for us to grow this area of the industry. We held a major workshop, and the report will come out shortly, which gives a number of recommendations. We had the major petroleum players there, as well as at other energy companies, and it hosts a list of next steps that the US will look at towards developing a more robust co-processing industry for the production of sustainable aviation fuel. And I will end there, leaving you my email if you have any questions out into the future. With that, I'll end. I hope I wasn't too far over time.
Hi there. My name's Martin Gulbis, and I'm Investment Manager as part of ARENA's Business Development and Transactions team. Our team has been active putting funding to work to support the development of a low-carbon liquid fuel space. We now have 5 projects that are out there in the public domain, which we're really excited about from our SAF funding initiative, and we're really looking forward to the next opportunities of funding through the Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund. Today, I'll be talking to you about the work that we've been up to in the last year and what we're planning to do to support the industry's progression. Firstly, I just want to pay my respects to the traditional custodians on the lands that we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. But firstly, what is ARENA and who is ARENA? So ARENA is the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and our goal is to support the transition to net zero emissions by providing funding to pre-commercial innovation. ARENA has been, and we do that by providing funding to pre-commercial renewable energy projects. And our focus there is where we see technical and commercial barriers that we want to overcome to support the industry's development. Our key lever here is to provide grant funding to help crowd in private investment and overcome these barriers. Our return on investment is not any sort of typical equity return. We don't look for equity stakes in projects. Our key goal here is not what we call knowledge sharing. So that is sharing knowledge developed from these projects that we fund and sharing this for the wider industry's benefit to help accelerate the transition. This graph here just provides an image of where ARENA's provided funding since 2012. As you can see, there is a large amount of projects and close to $2.9 billion of grant funding that ARENA's invested to date. ARENA's technologies of focus has evolved over time. I would say, with increasing penetration of renewable electricity in the grid, that's meaning that we're having to spend more time to look at the enabling technologies and those hard to abate sectors and how we can support that decarbonisation. There's been a large amount of investment that we've had to date across the solar PV, battery and grid integration sections, and that shows how much investment is needed to really move the dial in these sectors and support their commercialisation. We're now hoping to replicate that across the low carbon liquid fuel space with Bioenergy sort of represented there. ARENA really sees the role of low carbon liquid fuels to help support hard to abate sectors such as the transport sector. So what have we been up to for this last while? I'd say we've engaged with a wide amount of entities in the market. There's been over 100 different entities that we've spoken to, and I'm sure there are many more out there that we haven't. But I think that's a testament to the depth and knowledge and interest in this sector, which is really positive to see. For us, our key focus has been on closing our SAF funding initiative, and pleased to say that we now have 5 projects out there with $33.5 million invested. You'll see that's over the $30 million initial allocation that we had for the round, and we're hoping to get close to double that with more projects to come. Our focus with this portfolio is to build a diverse portfolio across technology, feedstock and parts of the supply chain. And would say that is represented well with the portfolio that we have announced today, with each of those projects having a unique value proposition. We know that HEFA will not be the silver bullet that gets us to scale volume supplies of liquid fuels in the market. However, this will be the technology that will help us get initial volumes to de-risk supply chains. So that's one of the key reasons why we've invested in Ampol's pre-feed study for the Brisbane Renewable Fuels project to help accelerate that. But we've also got our eyesight on the emerging technologies. So we've got Jet Zero Australia with LanzaJet's alcohol-to-jet technology, a really great scalable opportunity there on an emerging pathway for fuel production. And Licella with their CAT-HTR technology, a domestically developed technology that has a huge amount of potential there with being able to process waste and residual materials. But we're also looking at supporting other parts of the supply chain. So as seen with our funding announcement for Viva Energy, which is looking to enable SAF supply through the Brisbane Airport infrastructure. A critical part to look at how can a book and claim system be utilised for end customers to claim the environmental benefits of SAF supplied to airlines. And lastly, with GrainCorp, it's been spoken a lot today about feedstocks going offshore. ARENA really sees the value in onshoring the processing of those oil seeds and making sure they're used for a domestic benefit. ARENA's sort of goal in supporting this project was really to look at how can Australia's canola be competitive from a carbon intensity perspective on a global setting. And each of these projects, yes, they are at the development phase, so across feasibility and feed studies, but our goal here is to develop a wide range of projects which subsequent investment can be taken when the policy signals are there. I'll also give a quick shout out to the announcements in this space from the federal budget last year. I'd say it's huge for the low carbon liquid fuel space with the Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund with low carbon liquid fuels, a key priority area there, as well as some of the other enabling factors that we'll need in this sector to get to volumes of fuel. Supply and demand mechanisms and the consultation on that, and the development of the Guarantee of Origin scheme for low carbon liquid fuels, both very critical requirements. So what have we learnt from our SAF funding initiative? Would say that we've got good existing capacity in the market, and that's sort of seen by ARENA gaining licence with our board to fund more than that $30 million funding envelope. And we're seeing a high degree of technology and feedstocks coming through. We are seeing that the critical area that we can make impact at this point in time is with the development capital support. And we're seeing as that's a key lever needed in this uncertain policy environment. So we see a lot more funding to come in those spaces. We're also seeing challenges in closing finance for even the development phase of this project, and that's perhaps more the case with some of the emerging developers, but those challenges with securing finance are going to be very common themes as we move these projects from the development phase through to implementation. So we'll really need to have the finance community there with new ways to finance these incredibly complex projects. And lastly, spoken before about knowledge sharing. We will have more insights, or we will have insights coming out from our projects that are currently announced throughout the year. So please have a look at the ARENA website and our knowledge sharing section there, and like and subscribe. So what's next? The Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund. Look, there's not much I can say about that today. I'd say that it's been 18 months since we've had our SAF funding initiative launched, and we think now is a really good time for more funding to come to this sector. There will be a wider funding envelope, so we're really keen to see how we can make wider impact. And as sort of noted with how it's been framed today, there will be a scope beyond SAF to low carbon liquid fuels. So we've been hearing a lot today from road, rail and the marine sector. There will be opportunities there. And if you've got any activities in the space, please reach out to us. Always keen to have those initial conversations with proponents. And I just want to leave you with some emerging themes and questions that we are asked of us internally and we put to you as the market to inform us. How are we going to prioritise the best use of a limited bioenergy resource? And what sectors should these low carbon liquid fuels go to? We've built a good thesis for the aviation sector, but what about the demand for the mining sectors, the heavy transport, the marine? Really keen to hear your thoughts about where some of the demand could be coming from. Also keen to understand how this demand will change over time. I think there's been some very interesting reports released today from both Bioenergy Australia and CSIRO, so I think I'll have some good reading to do to help inform me on some of those points. But I'll just leave it there today. I want to thank you all for your time, and I'll be around the next few days, so please reach out if you want to have a chat. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you to Q for the tickets and allowing myself and a couple of colleagues to attend. So my name is Michael Cashen. I'm based in Wagga. Full-time with the Department of Prime Ministries, probably been there for about 23 years, done a lot of different things over that time. Probably the last 10 years I've been working in the energy space. I'm also a part-time strawberry farmer, so if you want to talk about strawberries, I can talk your ear off all night about that. I'd just like to start this presentation just a little bit about I guess the old adage, you don't know what you don't know, and I think Prime Ministry is largely unaware of the opportunities to decarbonise through low carbon liquid fuels, both in terms of being a feedstock provider but also utilisation of that fuel to decarbonise. They feel threatened at the moment in terms of needing to decarbonise and feel defensive about it, and I'm talking not just about Prime Ministries but fisheries as well. They see a limited opportunity to electrify because of their high horsepower requirements, long duty cycles, etc. And diesel has been a great fuel to date. So again, like a lot of other sectors, they've got long-lived assets, high capital items and low profit margins. So there are challenges there. I'll make this presentation a number of other people. Manu, who's in the room, John O'Connor, who's recently retired, and also Camilla. We've had a project which we very cleverly squirreled some funds away and rolled into the Decarb Hub with New South Wales. So this is a decarb project, and I thank their support throughout this period. But we had a budget of around 920k, some existing assets. So we had a hydrogen fuel-powered barber shop, which you may have seen last year at the Renewables Conference, which we offered free haircuts as a conversation starter. We also had a truck which ran on renewable diesel, which I'll talk to you in a minute. But initially we focused on, I guess, the terrestrial environment, so prime industries in terms of agriculture, focusing over the first 12 months. And in the last 6 months of last year, we started to move to the marine environment. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that case study and what we found with that particular initiative. So why the interest in diesel? About 80% of the energy for agriculture comes from diesel. It's an energy dense, easily transportable fuel that we really understand quite well. Interestingly enough, the emissions are very small in relation to the combustion of that diesel, and there's a lot of pressure in our own department why we're worrying about diesel when we've got this huge issue around enteric fermentation, particularly in beef cattle. My answer to that is really, I guess, it's more than just the emissions in terms of the impact. So we've got some big issues there. It's one of the largest operating expenses in terms of their production systems. They're exposed to massive oil price fluctuations. They're reliant on imported products, so we are exposed to huge amounts of risk. And I don't think we should underestimate that, given that we've probably only got 30 to 40 days of fuel here at any one time. It's one way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on farm, but also in the supply chain. And there's associated benefits both with social licence and I guess in terms of improving rural communities' resilience and supply chains over the longer term. In terms of the way farmers are feeling around this carbon space, they're also feeling, I guess, they're challenged by the supply chain. So government's not really coming over the top with demands around their emissions per se, but the supply chain's pushing back. So Coles and Woolworths are asking for their farm emissions now, or at least flagging it with them, depending on where they sit in the hierarchy. And there's likely to be market access constraints around those with high emissions and not moving to a lower emission profile. So there is constraints there. One of the challenges though is both fish farmers and fishermen find it hard to pass those costs on down the supply chain. Very different to aviation where you can bump the price of a ticket up. A farmer or a fisherman find that very hard to do in terms of being rewarded for their green credentials. We started this initiative a couple of years ago and we had the first hybrid diesel electric truck in the state fleet which ran on HVO 100. Our friends from Refuelling Solutions were kind enough to provide a large quantity of renewable diesel, so we got in the Nesty diesel. I think we paid initially $5.80, this is early in the piece, for that volume of diesel. It's subsequently down at $4.70. If you haven't seen renewable diesel before, on the back of the truck there, the fuel at the left's obviously renewable diesel, the one on the right is the diesel out of my tractor. So the difference is the aromatics, as someone pointed out earlier today. It does burn cleaner. We ran it at 100% just as a proof of concept. So when you start to have conversations with farmers and fishermen, they've all got a horror story around biodiesel. Whether that's based in reality or it's just a myth that's sort of perpetuated through the sector over time, it's one of the challenges around trying to make this transition to new fuels. So I think it's really important for us to demonstrate from government that we are running this in our assets and we haven't had any detrimental effect. That's sort of proof of concept. That truck towed a trailer, that's the H-Cuts trailer, that was just at our launch for our truck and trailer some time ago. Based on feedstock source, the emissions can be reduced by between 70 and 90%. At the moment, we can get Nesty fuel for around $4.70 a litre, but most of our industry are paying around $1.80 and they get an off-road diesel rebate. So the transition is very difficult to make that business case. Theoretically, we've done some modelling based on IEA Bioenergy projections for a domestic supply of renewable diesel. We think it could be in the range of $2.21 per litre, based on scale and time and learning rates, etc. Still, there is a big differential between the $1.80 and the $2.20, and that's the one we've got to try and meet. The other really important thing when you consider fishing industries, commercial fishers, they've got a limited size. They've got an existing asset which is a long-lived asset, and energy density is important. So the opportunities around electrification and these less dense fuels is more limited. Whereas renewable diesel has got a very similar energy density to diesel and makes a nice transition piece. So in the latter part of last year, we initiated a project targeting, I guess, the commercial fishing industry in New South Wales, taking, I guess, HVO 100 as a blend to the industry. They set a target, FRDC have got a 30% reduction in emissions target for the sector. We provided roughly around 30%, 35% of the fuel mix as a way of, as a shandy or a blended shandy to try and reduce those emissions, but also decrease the price differential between fossil diesel and this blended mix. So we approached Comfish. It was important when you work with farmers and fishermen to get buy-in. Comfish is sort of it sits under the Minister of Agriculture, but it's an advisory group. They're made up of fishermen. Very interestingly enough, I went into this group of people. There's 20 people in the room, one person, and these are the peak people in the industry who actually even heard of renewable diesel. So I think it's really important. It's very hard to sell something to people that haven't heard of something, so you really need to make that transition. Out of that engagement, we had 2 fishermen, Steve Everson at Yamba on the Clarence and Paul Aquilina at Spencer on the Hawkesbury, put forward their boats and took all the risk on, or a large amount of the risk, to use our fuel as a demonstration to industry. The department underwrote the financial risk. One of the challenges, and I guess some of the concerns for the sector to use new fuels, or I guess more experimental fuels than what they're used to, is the potential loss of income. So if the engine's in the boat, are well in the boat, and the boat's got to be pulled apart to get the engine out, very expensive. They can be $60,000, $80,000 engines, plus the loss of income while the boat's on the docks and the time to get the motor in and out, etc. So we basically financially underwrote that risk, financial risk, for those particular fishermen involved in the trial by creating a deed, so that the state government picked up the financial risk for that, and I thought that was an important element. So we delivered the 6,000 litres. The first fisherman got 5,000, and the latter fisherman, Paul, got 1,000. Renewable refuelling solutions were keen to be involved, and are very kind and very professional in it. And I'd encourage anyone who wants to do something similar to use these guys. I certainly looked them up. There's a number of representatives here in the room. So basically, we dropped the first lot up at the Clarence with Steve, and the latter lot went to Paul. He was down on the Hawkesbury, and I've just got a little video here which probably summarises what I need to know, and I'll come back to a conclusion there. Hopefully that should play. No, just can I go back? All right.
We've just finished the renewable diesel trial or demonstration with 2 fishermen, Paul Aquilina at Spencer and also Steve Everson at Armours Island, using 6,000 litres of renewable diesel as a 30% blend in a bigger fossil fuel mix. The Beyond Fossil Diesel project is basically taking renewable diesel and making the commercial fishing industry aware of this new product, which is a low carbon liquid fuel and an alternative to fossil diesel. The commercial fishing industry is looking to decarbonise like other industries. It's a hard to abate industry because other technologies like electrification and things like green hydrogen are, longer burns, and they're going to be harder to do. They need high torque, long duty cycle fuel types. Renewable diesel offers, some of the advantages of diesel, and in fact it's easy to store, it's easy to fix, and they can continue to use the same supply lines, maintenance schedules, and people are familiar with diesel engines. So it seems to be a good alternative. The reason we use fossil diesel is because it's cheap and it's reliable, etc. But as we need to, reduce our carbon footprint across the landscape and through commercial businesses, we need to look for alternatives. And fishing and farming, they're price takers generally, so they need to be careful of input costs. At the moment, it is prohibitive, but as the industry develops and we start to produce this product here in Australia and products like it, like sustainable aviation fuel, we expect the price will come down with the scale of production and it becomes more mainstream.
It's been really good. It burns really clean, stacked to the same as normal fuel, and I was very happy with it. There was no black smoke coming out of the boat. Yeah, if the price was the same as normal diesel, I'd use it all the time.
I'll just have to finish it there because I've got the nod to wrap it up, but there's a YouTube link there and I can put that in the presentation. You can watch that off YouTube. But just to finalise, so one of the outputs of this particular project is we did some economic sensitivities on the market in terms of what their capacity to pay for these new fuels are. So we did a farm-based one with John Welsh for a number of sites and farming systems across New South Wales, and again we did use BDO to do a fisheries analysis as well. Both sectors are price takers and they find it really hard to pass those costs on, particularly the fishing sector. Ag had more capacity to pay. And I'll just finish with one comment that Steve Everson gave me. He had a newspaper article from 1991 in terms of what he got for his green prawns at the Iluka port. He was getting $8 a kilo for his cooked prawns, king prawns then. He's getting $8 a kilo for it now. So and when you sell your prawns into the market, it's very hard to get
the green credentials around those prawns. I'd just like to thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Gun Galang. I'm pleased to be visiting Gadigal country today. Thank you very much to the Bioenergy Australia for organising this fantastic conference. So the theme of this session, I might move to my first slide. Oh, that's gone a bit weird. Anyway, I'll talk and we can figure it out. It's supposed to say what's in it for Queensland and then some reasons as what's in it for Queensland. So the theme of the session is government driving the acceleration of low carbon liquid fuels. But to start with, I thought I'd say what's in it for Queensland. It's worth reflecting on why the Queensland government is interested in this sector. So Queensland first identified low carbon liquid fuels as an economic opportunity about a decade ago in the 2016 Biofuels 10-year roadmap and action plan. As we've heard, currently Australia uses approximately 7 billion litres of aviation fuel and about 30 billion litres of diesel every year. And we know these fossil-based fuels can be replaced with those drop-in replacements that we're talking about today. So SAF gets a lot of airtime. It is very sexy. Everyone loves an aeroplane. But really, for Queensland, renewable diesel is equally as important. It's the driver of many of our key industries, our resources, our agriculture, our maritime. And so domestic supply of renewable diesel to 2050 at least will be essential in transitioning these industries to a more sustainable and, importantly, internationally competitive future. Low-carbon liquid fuels also present a significant opportunity for regional economic growth and diversification, particularly for our agricultural sector. And in a world where cost of living is on everybody's lips, these emerging industries can create opportunities along the value chain for good quality, well-paid jobs. So many of you will be aware we had a change of government in Queensland at the end of last year, and it's probably worth noting there was 3 election commitments that came out of that process that are quite relevant to the low-carbon liquid fuel sector. I think they're at the bottom there. Yes, just checking. So first is a commitment to actively look at ways the renewable fuel sector, such as biofuels, can expand, noting the importance of working closely with agricultural cropping production areas within Queensland. I am quoting very specifically. Second is a commitment to support and participate in a national feedstock strategy for renewable fuel production. And the third is a commitment to boost agricultural industry output to 30 billion by 2030. Now, these commitments talk to the priorities of the new Queensland government and why it continues to support the establishment of a low-carbon fuels industry. So with that in mind, I'll turn to what we are doing and what we think needs to come next. That one works. So thank you to the US Federal Aviation Authority for the very nice picture. So I've talked in forums like this, and as have other people from my team, about the levers the Queensland government uses to build new industries, including this new liquid fuel industry. So from a state perspective, our largest area's focus is around building supply capacity and capability. We're currently facilitating a small number of high-potential biorefinery projects with Jet Zero Australia, Ampol, Wagner Sustainable Fuels and Liquid Power, and some of them have actually spoken already today, so glad that Queensland's getting that recognition. These projects are located in different regions across Queensland, use different feedstocks, different technologies. They've got a combined capital expenditure of over $2.4 billion, and they could produce around 750 million litres of SAF and renewable diesel every year, and create around 300 ongoing full-time jobs. By 2030, these projects alone could be a $2.6 billion per year industry, supporting thousands of direct and indirect jobs across the state. So it's a solid start, but we know more is needed to meet future demand, and that's where the levers that are available to us can be used to support the longer-term needs and growth of the industry. For example, project facilitation, where we build interagency collaborations and help projects navigate approvals and find solutions. One of the ways we do this is we establish joint project working groups with key clients. It's a way to get everybody in the room to problem solve, really important for industries that might not be well understood or which fit within existing regulatory frameworks but have different pinch points to more traditional industries. In limited circumstances, targeted financial assistance may also be considered as a way to support project development. Often it can assist early stage industries in attracting other investors. But where our levers really make a difference is when we use them not just for one proponent, but to strategically build an ecosystem that supports an industry to grow. So looking at the low carbon liquid fuel value chain, we've identified some key elements that government is best placed to assist with. In particular, for this industry, for low carbon liquid fuels, we identified things like industrial land, electricity, supply chain. So Queensland, through the Office of the Coordinator General, has clearly defined areas of land for economic development in the form of state development areas, or SDAs. They usually have proximity to port, rail and road networks and are designed to meet local needs and opportunities. So the Coordinator General implements a development scheme for each SDA and controls land use, infrastructure, economic and environmental planning to support the vision for the SDA. Those are incredibly powerful tools to have. In SDAs, the Coordinator General often supports the delivery of common user infrastructure, such as shared road, utilities and other services that activate a precinct for multiple complementary projects. As an example, the Townsville SDA, declared in 2003, is positioned to meet the needs of large-scale projects, and I think Mac actually talked about it earlier. It's an ideal location for a renewable fuel project such as Jet Zero's Project Ulysses, where the government can also lean in and support the company with those navigating those planning and approval processes. We're also looking at gaps in supply chains and inputs into the production process. And this brings me to my next and hopefully more interesting slide, because I think probably some of you would have heard some of the things I've just said before. So our Queensland feedstock expansion study. So last year, the Queensland government commissioned some high-level research into volumes and types of feedstocks available in Queensland. And that research indicated that while we've got lots of potential feedstock, not all of it is technically, commercially or sustainably available. In fact, much of it is already being used and is contracted for other purposes. Feedstock has long been thought of as a long way to reuse, feedstock for fuels has long been thought of as a way to reuse a waste product. We need to reframe our thinking on that. Our research demonstrated there is no such thing as waste. It all has a value when considered as an input for other purposes. The study did give us a great baseline, though, and it's made it very clear that Australia, not just us, but Australia, needs to expand its feedstock availability to support the growth of the low-carbon fuels industry. We're not the first to talk about this. Lots of other people have today, and there's a whole session tomorrow morning. So I am pleased to say that in January this year, we kicked off another study with Deloitte, CSIRO, and the Rural Economy Centre of Excellence. This will expand upon the work we did last year and point to the opportunities in Queensland for developing both existing and novel feedstock types, which will increase our resources. Importantly, our regional stakeholders across the state have also identified feedstock as an industry and supply chain diversification opportunity, and so we're taking a place-based approach to the development of this new body of work. It will include significant stakeholder consultation to identify and set out critical pathways for the most viable opportunities for each region in Queensland. And it will take into account economic, environmental and community factors. As you know, there's a whole lot of different kind of levers that need to be thought about. Further, our 14 regional offices throughout the state will be heavily engaged at a local level to facilitate the study, again highlighting the importance of the views of our regional communities. The findings, expected by the end of this year, will be shared with industry and our communities. We would really like to work with colleagues in other states and territories and with the Australian government on this essential part of the development of the policy framework for low-carbon liquid fuels. I think certainly when Tim was talking earlier today, you're kind of looking at that too, so let's work together. So many reports and papers on feedstock have been published in the last couple of years and more are underway. Not just us. While they're not always consistent in the specifics or what needs to happen next, the broad findings clearly point to this groundswell of opinion that there's a real and significant opportunity for Australia here. And there's a need for national strategy with supporting policy that consolidates the work that's been done to date. So our feedstock study will be the basis of Queensland's contribution to what we hope will be the development of that national strategy. And there's some examples of the companies that are working in Queensland. So what are we doing next? We're continuing to work with industry, and that's just examples, there's plenty of others, and other stakeholders, including the communities where feedstock's produced, to develop an industry which creates benefits along the value chain. We know that globally a range of policy levers have been implemented to support development of a low-carbon liquid fuels industry. The Deloitte report we commissioned in 2023 flagged 3 areas that could be considered for government intervention in Australia: a market mechanism that rewards production and the use of low-carbon liquid fuels, supply and demand, time-limited support to bridge the cost premium, such as a production credit, and targeted investment into value chains. And they align with what proponents are telling us directly about the commercials of every project: feedstock certification, incentives, mandates or standards. We can't work alone on this. The industry is still very much emerging, and industry and all levels of government need to work together. We all have roles to play, and I'm very much looking forward to working with many people in this room over the next few years. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, my name is Daniel Roberts. I'm a Research Director with CSIRO's Energy Business based in Brisbane. So in CSIRO's Energy Business, we have 3 programs. My job is to manage a program of work which is quite technically broad. It covers our solar thermal, CO2 capture utilisation work, most of our hydrogen work, and also our bioenergy work. And I'm here to talk about that mainly because biomass gasification and applications thereof, that's also my technical background. So even though I don't do a lot of real research anymore, I'm not really allowed to get back on the tools. I do like to try and keep my foot in the door of what's going on, which is why I really love the opportunity to come to events like this. So thanks to Bioenergy Australia for the opportunity. So the talk is really just to give a bit of an overview of some of the work we're doing with a technology focus in renewable fuels. Anannya will talk a bit about some of the work we're doing in some of the upstream feedstock space. And there's sort of 3 broad areas, I guess, in that. There's the bioenergy pathway. I'll talk a lot about gasification because I can. And that works well, I think, because I think during this morning's and earlier this afternoon's session, we did hear about some of the gasification process blobs, and I'm keen to talk a bit more about some of the work we're doing to de-risk some of those. It's worth mentioning our biodice work, which is a woody biomass slurry, which is fed into a slightly modified diesel engine. If you want to know a bit more about that in the context of dispatchable renewable electricity, you can hit me up for that. We do a lot of work in power to liquids, very much in the context of some of the front-end technology development. So very active in hydrogen technologies. We have electrolysis technologies and aspects around carriers and utilisation. One application, as we've heard a fair bit of in this meeting so far, is as a feedstock to power to liquids. The other part of the feedstock for power to liquids, of course, is CO2, which is not that easy to come by. It's a process square on a lot of the flow diagrams, but I think a lot of work is still needed to really cost effectively capture that CO2, whether it's from the air, from a point source, or something else. And we have technology development in that space too. And what's really exciting is how some of those technologies, the hydrogen work, the CO2 work, are now becoming integratable as a unit and really hopefully reducing the process steps, reducing the cost, and really getting to a nice modular approach for a whole range of pathways to liquid fuels production. And ammonia as well. We are very active in ammonia synthesis and utilisation. We're quite plugged into the marine space. It was good to hear some of the shipping conversations earlier today. But I can't talk about each of those in 10 minutes. I can only just talk about one in 10 minutes. So I'm going to stick to the gasification space because I think that does help understand how the work we're doing is relevant to a whole bunch of other work that's going on and how doing it in isolation is probably not going to get us anywhere. I'm going to really briefly talk about the drivers for gasification R&D. I think most people in this room sort of get gasification, know where it fits in. I've been coming to Bioenergy Australia events for a long time. I know most of us understand it. In the context of large-scale low-carbon fuels production, however, there's some interesting nuances that I think require a fair bit of effort from those, whether it's technology developers or people like us that want to work with those technology developers, and that's about scale. Traditionally, biomass gasification is cheap and small. If it's getting deployed for new technologies, that's a bit bigger and a little bit less cheap, but really we've got to tap into some of that expertise from the really large scale, huge throughput gasification technologies, which are not the ones that we've traditionally played around with in the context of whether it's waste or whether it's biomass. And so there's some work to do there, not so much in technology development as such, and it's touched on a few times today. It's about bringing together existing bits of technology from other industries and other sectors and de-risking that integration so that it works for us in the context of low carbon fuels. And that's really driving the work that we're doing at the moment. So our approach is to work with the people that have some of those technologies, support demonstration and deployment, starting small where we can to increase familiarity and get the data we need to be able to work with the technology providers to do the pilot scale work, to support the large scale project development. But doing that in partnership. I think there's no point us just playing around with samples in our gasifier up in Brisbane. We really do need to focus on the de-risking component of what's going on. Because I think we've all seen, whether it's in a gasification for something space or another application, a failed project, a failed large project sets back the space, often by decades. And we don't have the time for that, I don't think. So what we really want to do is bring our knowledge and expertise, our understanding of some of the local feedstocks with the technology developers, proponents and the downstream operators to really manage that risk, which emerges when we start to look at the variability in the feedstock, the variability in conversion technology, and then the impacts that the outcomes of those conversion steps have on what we do downstream. And that, understanding some of the variability in those processes is really what we're trying to get done at the moment with our partners, some of which are around at the moment, and others in other sectors, such as the heavy industry sector, where these sorts of pathways can also play a role to replace natural gas use in processes that are hard to decarbonise with electricity. So here is just a snapshot of our facilities up in Brisbane. Hopefully they're still there after the weekend. It's about moving out of the laboratory, doing real scale testing with equipment that we can interrogate, run suboptimally, use feedstocks that might not work and not run the risk of damaging an otherwise fairly large piece of capital. This is work that we've just finished at the moment, which is an upgrade to that facility. So you can see our gasifier up on the top left. We've now got some downstream processes where we can clean the syngas from that gasifier and integrate it with custom designed test stations so that we can expose whether it's emerging downstream technologies or existing downstream technologies to syngases and contaminants and the real stuff that comes out of a gasifier under real world operating conditions. There's nothing really like this in this country, and as we talk to the people who are trying to come up with projects where we can demonstrate some sort of feedstock through some sort of thermochemical process and some sort of downstream liquids production technology, it's those risks associated with feedstock variability, what's going to get through into the syngas, how's that going to impact on the downstream processing technologies, and what can we do, whether it's in feedstock pre-treatment, operating the gasifier, or specific cleaning technologies to manage that risk properly. And this sort of work offers a really unique opportunity to do that at a scale that's relevant, and the throughputs here are, I think, like 70 to 80 kilograms an hour of dense biomass. And so that really gives us a real operating environment with which we can get really good data. So this is work that we've just finished in terms of setting it up. Our next step here is to start to gasify and do real measurements on real feedstocks. And hopefully when I come back here next time, I can talk about some of the results of that. So the numbers are red. There's about to be a bell, I suspect. There it is, right on time. that's the summary. I've said all of those things. For me, it's about diversification of pathways. It's about making sure the technology combination we are putting in place is well suited to both the downstream application and the feedstock that we have, and to make sure we have the knowledge to manage the technical risk associated with all of those in consultation, of course, with the people that actually have the technology and have the kit. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're almost there. 2 more presentations, and then it's the end of day 1. I'm Anannya. I come from the Agriculture and Food Research Unit, so another research unit along with the Energy unit at CSIRO. But I'm also part of a cross-cutting capability that looks broadly towards how can we build a pathway towards net zero emissions. My talk today is really about a recently released CSIRO report that unpack some of the opportunities on biofeedstocks that can potentially set up a low-carbon liquid fuel industry in Australia. Just to start off with, if nothing, what are the 4 things that we envision Australia should have in the next 25 years, say out to 2050? And 1 is fuel security. 2nd is reducing our carbon emissions. 3rd is jobs and growth in regions, as has been rightly spoken about throughout the day. And lastly, the most effective and optimal use of our bioresources. So starting with, so as many of you would know, that the CSIRO Boeing SAF roadmap came out a couple of years ago. What our report does is really extends the analysis into looking at what are the biofeedstock opportunities that exist for Australia, and how can these be unlocked, understanding what are the different competing uses, alternative demands, and what are some of the biggest barriers and challenges in this space. So the 2 key messages from our work is, first, biofuels will be a critical intermediate step to achieving our decarbonization, especially for the hard-to-abate sectors, but by themselves will not be enough to meet our net zero ambitions. And second, within biofuel production too, there's a strong need to diversify our feedstock sources and to avoid unwanted technology lock-ins or path dependencies. So CSIRO, in partnership with Deloitte, projected out what would be a theoretical demand for biofuels out to 2050. And what we see, rightly so, is initially light road vehicles are the ones that will take up, that will generate most of the demand for biofuels. But as we move further along and electrification becomes much more mainstream and there are more solutions that come in for a lot of these transport sectors, aviation is the one that will be the bulk demand generator out to 2050. And moving on, I think Australia's biggest advantage is in its abundant bioresources. Plenty of sun, wind, water, and a range of biofeedstocks that can be used to produce fuels. Currently, as we all know, oils and fats are the most commercially viable feedstocks. Australia exports large volumes of canola and tallow to global markets, which are processed into fuels and offshore refineries. Used cooking oil is another key oil-based feedstock that is most commercial currently, but estimates now suggest that we may be reaching the limits of this oil-based feedstock supply. What needs to come next is looking at what other feedstock sources do we have, what other processing pathways exist. Our analysis projects out further to 2030 and 2050 to meet the volumes of LCLF demand out to the future, we need to stack up all the different biofeedstock potential that exists to be able to achieve and unlock the pink bar that you see on top, which is really the advanced power to liquid processes. So each of these has a role to play. So starting with lignocellulosic materials, which is woody biomass, grasses, short rotation trees, and even carbohydrates like sugarcane, sorghum, all of these will be critical in unlocking greater carbon abatement. But the challenge is that these feedstock are not commercial yet. The biggest barrier they face is the green premium, which is associated with a lot of novel feedstocks. But along with that, a lot of other challenges like underdeveloped technology pathways, inadequate infrastructure, and the need for certification to gain market access into wider global markets. A comparison of existing studies also shows that lignocellulosic feedstocks processed through thermochemical pathways can potentially offer greater carbon abatement benefits than can be achieved by, say, an oils and fats route to fuels. So really the point that we try to make through this report is there are greater gains to be met by developing and diversifying our feedstock base rather than trying to prioritize an end-use sector for our low-carbon liquid fuels. Our analysis further shows that if left to itself, the market will naturally align towards the lowest cost abatement options, which right now is canola, tallow, UCO. And this will result in the larger pool of biofeedstocks remaining untapped and a skewed technology development. What we need is a set of complementary demand-side and supply-side levers that can help unlock the larger potential that exists to set up a viable low-carbon liquid fuel industry and access a much larger share of abatement gains. How we can do that is by two key levers. One is having the right enabling regulatory frameworks, in short, policy, and at the same time, having the right drivers to drive more incentive and capital allocation to first-of-a-kind solutions. And all of this will then spark innovation in more specific spaces like technologies, having more novel farming systems, an expanded set of logistics, specialized skill set, all of which will play their own role in enabling a larger value chain around low-carbon liquid fuels. Yeah, some examples that were covered on the last slide are really examples of innovation in agriculture and technology. And now I want to drill down more into what benefits exist from feedstock diversification. The biggest one is that there is opportunity for regions to grow, develop, and prosper in a more low-carbon future. What you see on the top are examples of native tree species that are present in Australia. Casuarina and Brigalow are two examples. And if grown on current traditional farms, they can offer a wide range of benefits like natural capital, shelter belts for animals, for farmlands, help with nitrogen fixation in soils. But along with that, if we have an investment in some of the gasification and pyrolysis technologies, something that Daniel also spoke about, we can find a way to utilize the woody biomass that comes out from these tree species to produce fuels. So there is now an added income stream for farmers, along with a range of core benefits, each of which can be ascribed a quantified value to. But what you see at the bottom is an example of what carbon farming might look like. Carbon farming options like human-induced regeneration typically means that we lock certain pieces of land into certain carbon offset delivering mechanisms. And what this might mean, potentially, is reduced local economic activity in those regions, potentially increased property prices, might benefit food production, and just lead to greater inequities in farming communities. What we can do, instead of what's seen at the bottom, is try and expand what our farming systems might look like, build resilience through planting of trees, through adopting maybe grain and graze models where you can have livestock and crops being managed on the same piece of land, and thereby really try and focus in on the value that land as a resource can generate for us. This is the other big finding that we had from our work is that the transition to an LCLF value chain will be messy, will be unclear, but there's no one pathway that is right or set in stone that takes us to our desired future. This is just a visual representation of what this complexity may look like. The first goal for us really should be to understand where is it that we are trying to be? What is the desired future that we're trying to work towards? An iterative process by taking into account the values and principles for all affected stakeholders might be the best way forward. And this is iterative. Again, a desired future is not set in stone. There are multiple pathways to reaching this future, each of which leverages a variety, can leverage different innovations. What you see are the orange dots on the screen. No pathway, each of the pathways will lead to different values and different trade-offs. Some will distribute value more equitably than the others, but all of these pathways require trade-offs and decisions to be made. What we want is to have a broader range of innovations and technologies unlocked for us so that when it comes to defining our future and picking a transition pathway, we have many options to choose from. One safeguard that we could potentially implement when trying to outline this future is to have a set of guiding principles around this transition, things that we definitely want to ensure irrespective of the transition path that we take. Some of these could be ensuring that bioeconomy is a viable value chain. There is regional co-development of these value chains into the future. There's resilience in agriculture systems. Biodiversity and natural capital safeguards are in place. And there are the right sustainability metrics to measure, to safeguard against any unintended consequences. And if there are unintended consequences, which there will be, there's a way that we can manage the risk. So in a nutshell, what we want is a system to develop with a long-term view, a system that is reflexive and maintains its ability to adapt and respond to changes. So what's next for us? Working with the industry and trying to consult with as many stakeholders across the value chain. 2 minutes, please. Thank you. One, we've identified there's a need to build greater confidence and trust in the space, in the emerging feedstocks, fuels, technologies, and their impacts. How we see this happening is to set up a low-carbon liquid fuel knowledge hub. There's a scaled-up version where this platform then ends up becoming a platform to collaborate across value chain, but also dispel some of the myths, misconceptions, and just build confidence in this transition. And lastly, what we see projecting outwards is to have a sophisticated decision-making capability that accounts for the various factors that will govern our bioresource allocation and optimal use. So that's all from me, and you can scan the QR code to access the report. And thank you, and you must have met a lot of CSIRO people in the room, but yeah, you can always reach out to us with any further questions. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Now, I had written lots of jokes, but I'm pretty terrified of the bell, so I've had to remove them all, and it'll be a very efficient and succinct presentation for you today. So I'm here to talk about the renewable diesel and SAF market outlook. For any of you who haven't had the pleasure of talking to my colleagues up at the Argus booth, Argus Media itself, which you'll learn a bit more about tomorrow, is a price reporting agency which focuses on pricing more than 1,000 different price series around the world. SAF and renewable diesel, or HVO, as we call it, has become one of them. And that's kind of the wider business's position. I myself, though, I'm in the consulting team and responsible for mostly market feasibility work on HVO and SAF plants. So we've worked on around 30 different projects across Asia Pacific in around a dozen countries. So depending on who you ask, I'm either part of the solution or part of the problem for us not having enough SAF capacity. I don't have to actually do anything on this slide because all of the wonderful speakers have informed you what all of these things are. We're now surrounded in a room full of experts, so I can move swiftly on. The themes that we'll talk about here start off with key barriers to demand growth, and there's going to be a bit of replication, but I'll try and make sure that I focus on some new points and bring out some interesting insights. Then we're going to look at barriers to capacity growth and barriers to investment in the SAF space, which has been another thing that's been talked about a lot today. And then talk about some potential solutions and try and bring it all back to the Australian market as well. So hopefully should wrap things up a little bit today. One thing we haven't talked about much today is prices of SAF, or actual market assessed prices of SAF. These are the reported SAF assessments on a FOB Singapore basis. So SAF and HVO prices shown here versus fossil jet. The interesting things that have happened, you can see that there's been a pretty relentless downward trend that's been observed between 2022, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the pressure that put on vegetable oil prices, very tight European biofuels markets all contributed to that very high price. In 2022, huge premiums for HVO and SAF. Also a market that was very few producers, a couple of them in the room, who were exposed to these very high premiums for HVO and SAF versus fossil fuels. Came down a lot in 2023, it came down a lot in 2024, and now here we are in 2025 with both of them at around $1,000 per tonne premium to fossil jet. So prices have come down a lot. We're talking about $2,000 a tonne rather than the peak of sustainable aviation fuel, which was around $4,000 a tonne back in 2022. So technically speaking, for anyone looking to purchase it, it has got a lot cheaper. So it looks a little bit better at least. Now, But we haven't seen this sort of dramatic uptick in demand for these fuels on a voluntary basis, despite these costs coming down so much. So it's quite clear for us that the conclusion is, you still need a lot of policy to support demand growth in these areas. It remains, 2 to 3 times the SAF price, even in what we would deem a very weak market for HVO and SAF right now. And there's definitely reasons that it could go back up in the future, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But the key is we need those policies. So looking around the world, and I won't dwell on this too long, there are policies popping up all over the world. The US and the European Union have led the way for more than a decade, in some cases looking at driving demand growth for renewable fuels. More recently, we've seen that focus on renewable diesel and SAF as we've run up against technical blend limits on methyl ester biodiesel. So that's where we see that development really grow. For HVO, we only really have mandates in South Korea that's been proposed in 2030 at 3% as part of an 8% overall target. All of the other renewable diesel demand or HVO demand we would expect to concentrate in markets where there is policy support, the European Union and North America, where we have a lot. I've sort of just highlighted here the roadmap for SAF blending in the European Union. 2% this year, 6% 2030, 70% 2050. All accompanied by aggressive penalties for non-compliance, which I would sort of highlight as a key theme here. We've talked a lot about policies. The vast majority of them, especially here in Asia, are not accompanied by robust policy frameworks and implementation mechanisms. To put some numbers on it, the UK has listed a sort of proposed buyout price on biogenic SAF at £4.70 a litre, which equates to around $7,000 a tonne, and for eSAF at £5 per litre, up at around $8,000 a tonne. So there are market drivers and policy-based drivers that can support prices at elevated levels. What we know, and we can translate all of that, we take a much more bottom-up approach. We look at policies. Is there policy support directly based on the implementation mechanism that will carry it through to actualize demand? So this is based on firm policies only, doesn't take into account any potential additional voluntary demand that would come from airline targets from players like Qantas or Japan Airlines, Nippon Air. So this is our firm demand outlook. We have continued growth in renewable diesel demand supported by the European Union and its push towards Renewable Energy Directive 3. We have a lot of SAF demand coming from that 6% jump and then a big jump in 2035 for SAF demand as well in Europe. So the conclusions on our side is there is a lot of support globally, not necessarily in certain key markets across Asia, but we are seeing that continued push from policies to grow demand. Now, if we compare that to announced firm capacity, that would be capacity that is either operational or post-FID. We look pretty well supplied this year, and it's something that contributes to those relatively weak HVO and SAF prices in Europe at the moment. But by the time we get to 2030 and beyond, especially into 2035, we definitely need a lot more capacity. So the conclusion is, on the policy side, at least globally, there's a lot to help us overcome the barriers, and there's a lot to drive continued growth, which is where we come to the key barriers to investment. And you can notice my pace is gathering as the clock continuously winds down. I feel like James Bond going here as the clock ticks towards zero. The 3 key barriers we'll talk about here: prices, costs, margins, feedstock constraints, and regulatory uncertainty. If you're in the European market, regulatory uncertainty is not something that you're exposed to. You have these buyout prices and clear national policies and European-wide targets, not something that we have the benefit here in Asia Pacific generally. But we're going to start off on the production margin side. We can just show very simple variable cost margins. So this is basically what you get in terms of revenue from producing HVO on the left or SAF on the right from used cooking oil versus variable costs. So hydrogen costs, utilities, electricity, etc., catalysts. Simple margins have come down significantly. So right now it's not a great investment environment. If you're going out and looking at building a HEFA plant, the current economics look pretty average, and we've seen BP and Shell and other huge companies announce pretty pessimistic, make pretty pessimistic announcements about having to put delays or in some cases cancellations of projects. So that margin environment doesn't look great. Now, the good thing is we are focusing a lot of demand. So as the market tightens, as we see demand tick up towards the end of the 2020s, we should see those margins reverse. So the first hurdle should be possible to overcome, especially for heifer. The second one is feedstock constraints. Now, this is for heifer specifically here. Everything below the line isn't technically eligible for the European Union's SAF mandate, which is obviously our clearest and sort of most concise based volumetric mandate. And you can really see that the concentration of feedstocks in the top right-hand side, which are high GHG reduction and highly eligible, are all very small streams. Used cooking oil is by far the largest stream, around 12 million tons. The global collected and utilized used cooking oil market last year has potential to grow. Got to remember that of that 12 million tons, around 6 million tons came from China alone, which is now subject to lots of different things happening, like their export tax rate rebate being removed. They're having to contend with big anti-dumping duties imposed on biodiesel and HVO coming from the Chinese market into the European Union. So there's a lot of interesting things that will affect the dynamics of regional feedstocks going forward. Conclusion, though, we realistically need a wider range of feedstocks. So that's looking into new heifer feedstocks or looking at new technologies. The next one, that regulatory uncertainty, and I've got less than a minute to go. So we've got a lot of targets that have been announced across Asia that we've already seen a little bit today. If we only look at policies that have a clear implementation mechanism, it's only really Singapore. Even Japan's 5% GHG reduction target in 2030 that's been talked about for several years now, it's not formally written into the Sophisticated Act. We're still waiting on clear and full implementation mechanism. So that regulatory uncertainty remains. You've got to add on to that a lot of uncertainty about regional feedstock and trade flows. All of the countries highlighted here have at some point aggressively restricted the flow of feedstock or finished fuel. It could be from, India bans the import of fuel ethanol, Thailand bans the import of biodiesel, all to protect the domestic industries there. So there are clear distortions from a regulatory perspective that are very nationalistic in ways. We've seen it emerge in feedstocks as well, with Indonesia banning or at least putting sort of temporary caps on the export of palm oil methylene and used cooking oil to divert it towards domestic industry. So we're likely to see a continuation and in some case escalation of these nationalistic policies that could distort markets going forward for those very valuable feedstocks. I'm already over time, and thanks that you haven't rung the bell, but there it is. Some solutions. Here we've tried to put some very simple costs. Now these are built up estimated net costs of SAF production expressed for the European Union. So there are some caveats that need to be added here. You can see on the red line as well the SAF price of that given year, and you can really see that it's only heifer that right now, based on current SAF prices, looks in any way viable. The only way those other technologies become commercially viable and start to see more support coming from financial institutions is if we see the price of SAF rise. To see the price of SAF rise, we need to have mandates that are supported by either credit systems like we see in the US or significant penalties like we see in the European Union. Final one for the opportunities for Australia. The European Union finalised its the role of cover crops, rotation crops, and energy crops. Very interesting for such a huge agricultural market like Australia. And then finally, for the situation for Australia, if we talk about those three significant barriers to development here, prices and margins, everyone's affected too, and it's likely to get better in the future. Australia remains one of the only countries in Australia that has huge feedstock potential. It's a huge net exporter of these types of feedstocks, so it's in a much more advantageous position. We've worked on HVO and SAF projects in all of the highlighted countries here, I think, and it's a rare thing that I'd get to say to the client is that you're sat on a lot of feedstock that you could use. So really the final piece of the puzzle in Australia remains that regulatory uncertainty, where sort of it doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of a volumetric blend mandate, but some type of government support that could help get those final investment decisions over the line. Thank you very much. I did run over, apologies.
Thank you, and what a wonderful range of speakers we've had, and I'd like to invite everyone up to stage for what we will probably class a very quick Q&A session, as we've run fairly over time. So as we come to the audience, I'll just reach out. We do have a few questions on the app, but I just wanted to see if anyone in the audience had a burning question before I go to those on the apps. Right. I can't see any hands up, so we'll go to the app. So a question that got asked, I'm not sure who this is directed to, but it's an open one. So how can the government support farmers in recognising their green credentials?
I think it's difficult in commodity markets. Those that are involved with niche marketing, I think they can, and that's usually often the small scale, closer to the end consumer. Yeah, it's a difficult one because the bulk of our commodities are produced in a commodity market, which are exported about 70%. So it is a difficult one to do that, and I think that's a challenge, to be frank. Yeah, even the small scale fisherman, like really, he's like on the case I illustrated with Steve there. He's selling into the Aluka fish market, which ends up in Sydney. He's getting $8. They're getting $45. There's a huge differential there. Yeah, and I actually don't know that the average consumer would pay more for prawns with green credentials or commodities with green credentials. I mean, I think it's a bit of a challenge, actually.
And it's an interesting, I'll just probably add some commentary around running the National Green Power Accreditation Program is trying to drive certification using voluntary markets to drive that demand and recognising people's contribution in the absence of mandates. And so we spend a lot of time, and so you do it for renewable electricity already, but how to look at other fuels and other areas to be able to recognise people's activities in doing that. And it is challenging in the different markets depending on how they aggregate their product, where they sell it to. There's also a lot of work being done under the Guarantee of Origins scheme for different certification methodologies, but it's how to, once you've got that, how do you socialise that and put it in the right way, give it enough credence and credibility that farmers and people can use it to be recognised by their consumers. And so we spend a lot of work in Green Power trying to work out that problem, but I agree with you that particularly for farmers and fisheries, it's a hard market.
We did have a presentation from Woolworths the other day internally, and they were one of the buyers, and they've got a scheme where they've got green credentials around their carbon footprint for their key beef products. Again, they had to pick and choose the producers that were going to provide those products, and they had to be premium cuts from premium animals, because even at the high end of the market, their consumers wouldn't pay more for just green credentials. And I think that's important for us to realise that. Because mum and dad has only got so much money, and they've got to stretch that money over a number of purchases through the week, and it's a limited number of people who will actually pay more for those things, even though they want to. That's just they're limited in what they can do.
I might just add a comment to that. I think looking forward to what we want to do in the fuel space, keen to sort of see if there's innovative ways we could engage the ag sector. If there's anyone that has ideas in terms of models of sharing revenue with the ag sector, clearly they're going to be very critical for any projects we move forward in this space. All the developers will need feedstocks. It's sharing value across the supply chain that we really need to see. So if anyone has any ideas and we don't know what needs to be done, let's have a chat.
Great, thanks. The next question is for Arena, for you, Martin. There's a couple of questions, but I'll try and group them into one due to time. So it's about, according to you, what is the necessary Arena or / government budget needed to support the emerging LCF industry and secure several onshore producing refineries in the short term? And when you're thinking about that, it's also what is the $1.7 billion Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund, and what is the allocation to LCF, and what are the funding rules, and when does funding start getting allocated?
Easy question, thank you. Look, on the second part, cannot say anything more on that at this point in time, so hope to see more being announced on that shortly. In terms of exact dollars that needs to go into this space, look, it's in the realm of billions of dollars. So We know there'll need to be a mixture of capital grants to support the emerging technologies, so those that have not been commercialised today, and there'll also need to be revenue support for some of the demonstrated technologies, so heifer pathway, that sort of thing. Look, large-scale investment needed. We need to keep unpacking that question a bit further.
The next question is somewhat of a question, but also a statement is, at New South Wales, why don't you advertise your renewable diesel as Australian grown and made rather than made sustainably? So I suppose, Michael?
Largely it's not. So in terms of sourcing renewable diesel, the bulk of it's imported. I mean, trying to find that is, there's some pilot scale stuff. I think like Southern Oils and others have done some small scale stuff, but the bulk of it's coming in predominantly to this point, from Nesty, through various resellers. So that's the situation we're in. Yeah.
I suppose it highlights a point though about having like the value of the homegrown and that can be used if we can get our own.
Absolutely. I think we should be. I think energy security is a really big important issue, and I think if we can create a product here that is Australian made, I think people will get behind it, as long as it was at a price that they could afford to do it.
Yeah, agreed. So another question here. We've covered biofuel crops, marginal lands and ag residues availability. How are the elemental resources required for these production systems and the nutrient balances tracking to keep up with demand? Well, that's for CSIRO, I would imagine.
Yeah. Could I have the question again?
Sure.
It's a big one.
We covered biofuel crops, marginal lands and ag residue availability. How are the elemental resources required to keep for these production systems and the nutrient balances tracking to keep up with them? I think can the systems keep providing the feedstock availability?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, because what our work also acknowledges is that, while there's a need for diversification, you have all of this different untapped feedstock out there that just needs to be aggregated at the right price through the right logistics. We also acknowledge that there are co-benefits, there are other systems, there are competing demands and alternative uses for our bioresources, not just the feedstock part, but also land, water, and sun. An additional thing that needs to be acknowledged above and beyond all of this is that this resource is also not one up for exploitation or overuse. We know biofuels have a role to play in the transition, but it's a role that needs to be carefully defined for all the resources, communities, and value chains that will be set up. So to keep it all tracking, to ensure that we are not having any unintended spillovers, unintended risks that come out from, say, channeling too much feedstock into one process and ultimately affecting biodiversity or affecting soil nutrient in ways, is a key part of unlocking that feedstock potential for us. And CSIRO has a lot of specific capability groups that work in these areas. So what's needed is greater collaboration and communication between all of those stakeholders and our research groups.
So we need a project to make sure that growing lots and lots of crops isn't going to mean that we have to double our ammonia production capacity, thereby completely ruining any carbon saving that we may have had by doing the biofuels in the first place. That's a project proposal. We should write that one down.
Yep.
I might just make a comment. Look, I think we need to ensure that any feedstocks that we're looking to use don't degrade the land. If our carbon sources in the soil deplete, that's going to make that land no longer useful. So I think we really need to look at those feedstocks that can improve soil carbon. We've got some novel crops out there, Pongamia, we've got Carinata. These crops can help improve soil and carbon, and in my mind is sort of a way that we could look to increase the scale of land that we have for renewable fuel production.
And the next question is somewhat related, but maybe for you, Michael, or potential CSIRO, is regarding biofuel in agricultural applications. Has bio